Welcome back to the Total Confidence Podcast, Season 3. I am super excited about today's guest. We have with us Christa Hardin. Christa Hardin has counseled and coached couples all over the globe for 2 decades. Founder of Reflections Counseling Center, LLC. Christa hosts the popular Enneagram and Marriage podcast, which is excellent, by the way, which has over 1 million downloads and has helped thousands of couples find refreshment, joy, balance, and connection together. Christa uses the Enneagram and other research-based marriage tools to give couples deeper insight into their strengths and shadows and to help them determine how they can shine brightest in the world together. She lives with her husband and children in sunny Florida. Welcome to Total Confidence Podcast, Christa.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a joy to be here.
I'm so excited to talk with you. I listened to quite a few of your podcasts, and I also have been listening to the audio book. Congratulations on your book release.
So much. This is so exciting. And I love that you've tuned in. I've enjoyed your conversations as well. I love that you're hacking into that 5 space often because you are 5. That is such a joy for me to hear. I love that space.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You grew up in Michigan?
Mm-hmm. Yes, near Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit. Tell me what it was like growing up in Michigan and how has growing up in Michigan shaped your worldview?
I've really enjoyed bringing, of course, there's a lot of team sports in Michigan. And so I still feel like I'm a Detroit Tigers, Lions fan, even when the Lions are not doing well, which they often struggle. But like, we're just like we have a lot of industry there, a lot of cold weather. And so the sports are huge. And I just love the roots of the hardworking class there as well. My grandparents were automotive people, and they really expressed a lot of love and joy in just kind of getting to work, even from the World War II days, which I share in my book. My grandma was working on Browning machine guns in those days. So we have a lot of history. There's a lot of boarding house tales from the Upper Peninsula, Croatian relatives coming to the United States. So it was, of course, eclectic to grow up there.
That was fascinating, and I found that fascinating about in your book talking about your grandmother and just how she rarely ate and rarely slept based on the hardships. I thought that was just really, really mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah, that was hard, but she was so quirky and silly, and it was like, Grandma, you're living, but like, how are you living? Like, I don't eat, I don't sleep. I'm like, you don't. What's going on here?
What's interesting too, and I actually was listening with my type 7 daughter, and just about you told the story in your book in so many words how you and your now husband Wes, you really weren't that interested in him at first.
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, I didn't even get to share in the book the backstory to the backstory of us was that my friend Heather, who I talk about in the book, she also first approached me about him before I even met him and said, there's this new guy here. Here's what he's like. And she named an archetype very different from me, a type 1, and also football player. And I was like academic, even in my roots of my family, even if I was partying at the time. And I was just like not interested at all. Like I was dating somebody else at the time, but I remember when she told me about him and I was like, oh, it sounds so annoying. Like another jock. Well, that's just what we need is a new transfer jock.
So what was it about him that finally, and I think this is important to kind of lay the base for the book and everything. What was it about him that you finally said, let me give this guy a chance?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're here in these early mid high school days, and I just really was surrounded myself and others with, partying and, cliques and, doing things to get the college degree coming your way and all the things you're kind of checking the box off, or you should have this in high school, you should have that. But there wasn't a lot of sincerity. So when he finally cornered me, he kind of did have to corner me for that date with me feeling like it wasn't like I was like, you're a terrible person. It was just, we're so different. I thought he was a good person. person. But I was like, you're not my type. And so what finally worked is he knew that I was kind. And so he got me in the car with my friend and he dropped her off first. And then he asked me for this date. On the date, which I did have because I took the date because I felt bad for him. And that's not advice to anyone to do that, but that's where it was at. I was like, he's such a wonderful person. Like, I feel bad. I'm going to go on this date. But on the date, as I share in the book, he wins my heart because instead of doing the typical, like, hey, want to have a drink or, want to go smoke weed, he says, like, can I take you for a piece of pie? Can we talk about life, our families? Just so genuine, so mature. As he likes to joke, he was like 40 years old by the time he was 16. So I was just so impressed. And on that night, I actually called my dad and I said, can I stay out even later? And my dad, who was an 8, was like, absolutely not. Get him out. There was a whole story to that. What my friends had like done something to my car. Yeah. Anyway, we've been together since that night. Long story short.
That is amazing. So as you in your work as a therapist, what led you down the path of dealing with marriage and relationships?
I really always loved that. Even with my parents' marriage, there was this dance of my dad being 8-ish, my mom being very 9-ish / 2-ish. And I saw a lot of friction. They were extremely passionate and called it a Wuthering Heights relationship. And I was even going to put that in my book, but my very wise editor was like, Wuthering Heights is like so toxic. And I was like, this is true. And that's how I grew up. But at the same time, there was a lot of deep love. And so I would try to help my parents as a very young girl. That's sort of how I got my start. Was I would pass notes under the door from mom to dad because I wanted to survive. I wanted to make sure my parents' marriage made it so that my family could make it. My mom often talked about with her mental health condition, schizophrenia. It was latent because she had medication, but she's like, I need him, but then she would get upset and be like, I have to leave. And so there was these pieces of me like, my family is going to break if I don't help. So I've had to work through that in therapy. But what was interesting was sometimes the little kid thing you could even do, like sometimes it wouldn't work, but then I would figure out what did work as a troubleshooter. And so I would find that these notes work to be like, okay, mom says this, dad does this. And my parents were getting older and they really responded well to that too, because they were tired. They're like, we've been together 20, 30 years, like, what is this little girl doing? Let's give her a chance. And so they would respond kindly and then they would make up sometimes. And I just thought that was fun. I'm like, okay, A, I get to survive. B, they're happy together. Very romantic, Wuthering Heights. And they had a long 40-year marriage with a million love poems and beautiful moments too. So there was a lot of good too. So that's really how I got my start, interestingly, before all the clinical stuff.
Interesting. So how did you come to discover the Enneagram and what was your first impression of it?
I was, as a 7, I looked at it quickly, did not think of it as a rigorous test or see the depths of it. And so I took it on a coaching website on a whim and then walked away from it right away. Type 7, okay, cool. What does this mean? Probably nothing. I've already done my clinical work with psychological assessments on a deep dive level. I used to be that master's level psychologist on the team of 15 therapists where they're like, give Christa all these assessments. She'll dig through them. It'd take her 20 hours or so. So this looked to me like this kind of very quick look, like I'm like child's play. And then ridiculous, right? But that's a 7 for you, kind of quick look, make the quick judgment. So then I end up meeting with my good friend Carla, who's a type 4 and a very gifted therapist. And 4s take their time, as you know.
Yes.
And she said, Christa, I know you love couples, and I need you to know this tool is very good for couples. You should give it a second look. Never turned away, just like with Wes. I never turned away once I gave it that second look. I'm very loyal if you can catch me.
That's awesome. Awesome. So how has the Enneagram helped you personally in your own marriage? And then how has it been beneficial in helping others? Well, let's start with your own marriage first.
Yeah. So with Wes and I, we were using all my tools and we were getting by sort of treading water. We both had all that trauma I shared. He had a truckload of his own. And so we also didn't have the best examples growing up of like, what does a healthy way to walk through conflict look? What does longevity look like after the honeymoon period? So we had many of my tools and we put those to use. But we didn't have anything to really take us on the deeper soul drive, so nuanced as the Enneagram. So when Carlette, my therapist friend, asked me to look on a deeper level, I started to get a little embarrassed when I saw the 7 things. I'm like, oh, I'm no wonder I burn out when I did this or that. Things started to fit. And a lot of it was some of the things Wes had been saying about me. So I was also seeing my strengths. So that was a good piece. The Enneagram was able to say, like, hey, you have some gifts. And then also, here's these weaknesses, and here's the why. You've never been able to trust anybody to help you. So you've been carrying all these plates alone. And then Wes in his type 1, he's always wondered if he was right and good. And then I'm like, oh, so his criticism that he makes of me sometimes isn't driven out of hate. It's driven out of his own woes. So when we brought that together and talked it through, took a few months, took some time. It really changed us. So I then began to bring it to couples. And I asked my first couple, a 9 and a 3, who were going through an affair. And I said, look, you're in the hardest straits. I have a new tool. It's been foundational and groundbreaking for my own marriage. May you guys be my first guinea pig couple. And they were phenomenal about that. They walked through it. They read the Russo Hudson book. I mean, why did I say Russo? Yeah, I'm on a fast paced rant right now. Sorry. But they really dug in. Yeah, to that, I think Russo Hudson book. And they really enjoyed with me just this whole process of like, how was my 9 walking away? How was my 3 too sensitive to talk things through? So for those of your listeners who know what happens in these types, they got to deep dive and see affairs don't happen just in a vacuum. They happen because people are hurting really badly.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and even the way you address the affair thing, because sometimes you often hear people say that's it. Once an affair happens, that's it. What are some of the I guess what has helped help couples get through that? Because sometimes that's a death sentence for marriages, but those who have survived that, what has been the difference between those who survive it and that is the death knell?
I think that they're able to see the bigger story, the marriage narrative. And this goes outside and inside of Enneagram work, but especially outside, narrative therapy is very powerful. And when people can spend some time, even on their own, talking through the whys about things that happened, and to be able to say, were we spending the quality time we each deserved? Did we have good, healthy examples? Were we, aware that this friendship would lead into something that was very powerful when you and I were at odds? And it becomes less about that third party or multiple parties and becomes much more about the strong foundation of this relationship being built up. And sometimes people are like, I also have a trust issue. I'll never be able to trust somebody again. And so that's when it doesn't make it, or it doesn't make it because somebody says, I don't want to do that work. I'm still wanting to go off with my affair partner. And I don't want to look at myself. And so there's all kinds of possibilities for how it ends, but when it ends well, that's what happens is people start to say, you are the one who cheated. You're still at fault 100%. I'm still going to have to walk through my grief process here. And I may need to do that for a while, and we may need to do that for a while, but we're also going to need to narrate differently and choose some healthy couples patterns to go forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what I'm hearing is, I often hear people say marriage is work.
Yeah.
And I don't, I never really understood what that meant. Now I've been married for 23 years.
Awesome. What's your wife's type?
She's a type 2.
Oh, I talk about that pairing, the 5 2.
Yeah, and but as I get deeper into this work and I understand just us having a different and I love that about your book, by the way, too. You talk about how sometimes I actually was listening to that today, how we can sabotage unintentionally our spouse's growth as we move in and out of our vices. And the way we see the world, because I see the world differently than how she sees it, or vice versa, it can lead to this conflict. What are some ways that let's use the 5 and 2 for an example, because those are the polar opposites. How do you help them to integrate their gifts?
I love your question. I was just talking to a therapist friend about this morning, how once a spouse grows, sometimes their spouse can sabotage it. But with a 2 and a 5, the 2 really has to grow towards humility, and the 5 really has to grow towards, as you know, this expansiveness, coming away from the avarice or the greed. And it's beautiful because they help each other so much, where the 2 is like, oh, like, you're so amazing, and let me cheerlead for you. And you don't have to hold on to these resources, because when you give, there's a synergy that comes with the giving. And the 5 says to the 2, like, you have worth outside of this giving, though. Like, you are able to develop your mind. You are creative. You have great ideas, and you're not just a pretty face. But I think what's really important is that when the 2 says, I have to work on my pride, the 5 can also help with, like, okay, we're all beloved. And where that can also hit the 5 the wrong way is 5s can struggle with competency. And so they almost want to project that their spouse, the 2, is the best. And that can puff the 2 up, and it can leave the 2 isolated with other relationships. And that can be very interesting, because now the 5 has the 2 pushing too hard on the 5. And because the 5's like, I need some space. And the 2's like, yeah, but my friends don't appreciate me because the pride is going. But yet the 5 doesn't realize they're projecting the pride with the 2. So I would say for that 5 to be able to say, you know, like, you are amazing. You're my beloved. You're my best. But when amongst your people, let's always hold humility. And even together, let's remember we each have strengths and struggles. And then the 2, of course, can say to the 5, hey, when you are lost in your worlds, help me to know how I cannot suffocate you, so that you don't feel like I'm taking all of your resources and energy. Help me to know how I can support you, even if you don't have many needs. Help me to know what I can do to make your weight less heavy. Versus, of course, like we said, if we're trying to grow without this intention, we could knock each other right down.
You know, what I'm hearing from you is just like, it has to be intentional. I know often we get married and we don't know what it all entails. And it's like, no, it's not like, hey, I'm just me and I'm going to be in my world and you're you, but it's actually integrating, which is very, very difficult. And I think often people aren't prepared for the reality of marriage outside of the romantic love. And you talk about the seasons of love in your book. Could you expound on that, like the seasons that love goes through?
Yeah, they go fairly along with Erickson's stages of development, if anyone's familiar with those. And when we're getting together, we're coming into that, you know, intimacy versus isolation. You might have heard that. But what's happening in a relationship is you're finding that intimacy. You're shining together. You're lighting each other's worlds up. This, you know, person is now filling things in you that you thought would never happen for you, could never happen for you. And there's a sense of, I need to be with this person once I realize and get past maybe my initial fears about relationships. And so you really do lock in together, and then you begin to heal one another. So you're shining, and then you're even healing each other. Like, of course, my husband said to me, like, oh, I can't, you know, believe you had to give your parents therapy, and like, let's set better boundaries with them so that you can live a healthier life. And I said, thank you. That's what I've been trying to do. And each couple will do that in their own way. But it's beautiful. And yet next we come into a season, usually about 5 years in, where we realize, okay, I've risen up. My spouse has helped to heal me some, but we forget that they've been part of that work with us. And there's this arrogancy that comes, this fundamental attribution error of thinking that we're a little bit better and healthier than them. And so we begin to judge them harder and feel like I'm growing past you and we're too different. And so the shadows come back in. And usually that's surrounding kids and difficulties with work and the busiest seasons of life. We're in the sandwich generation. That's really where it's important for couples to start immersing in the work that we're talking about today, so that they can find this 2.0, this afterglow together, instead of just landing in the darkness and ending things.
Yeah, your book really hit me in a couple of places, right? Because that landed personally with me, because we have a large family. My wife and I, we have 9 children. We got started early. We have 9 children. So often she was at home while I was learning the Enneagram, learning these other things. And so I was able to grasp, get these tools. And so she might not have had the time to develop in those areas like that. So I'm glad you addressed the arrogance that can come as a result of, oh, I'm growing at this pace, as opposed to our spouse who may not have the freedom to do that at the time. So that landed really well with me.
Good. I'm so glad. And that goes for our extended family and many people who, my husband sort of is in and out of the Enneagram community both. And he's like, it's a tool for really intelligent people. And I was really surprised to hear that, because I do believe it's a tool for everybody. And I think we all believe there's multiple intelligences.
Yeah.
But he was reminding me, like, not everyone has this tool, so you can't judge everybody on the tool, like you just said. So yes, that happens in mid-marriage, whether you have the Enneagram or not, though, is this sense of like, I rose up on my own bootstraps. I don't know who you are.
Yeah. 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 I
And
love the
then
realness of your book. Yeah,
you would-
there's a lot of Enneagram books out, but there's zero, and I'm not saying this because you're in front of me, but there's zero fluff in your book. And that's what I love about it. It's like really hard hitting. On your podcast, the Enneagram and Marriage, you talked about the 3 big issues in marriage.
Yeah.
What are those major issues, and why do you believe these present such a challenge in marriages?
Yeah, I've done some research around communication and finances and intimacy, and these seem to be the big 3. And we know there's others. In-laws, for some people, it's going to fall outside of the bell curve. But when couples can't communicate well, they tend to stonewall, they tend to withdraw. In other words, they tend to lash out, some get abusive. It's hard to live together if you don't have healthy communication. It's also hard when you're strapped financially. One of the reasons my colleague and I were talking the other day about the fact that we don't rise our rates higher as therapists is because I know the statistic that couples who don't have as much money struggle more in their marriage. So that's just a huge place that couples who need the therapy can't often get it.
Yeah.
And lastly, the sexual intimacy area, I feel like a lot of even the most modern, and this was part of even what helped me to want to write the book, is a lot of the most modern marriage treaties are now even offering polyamory or hurting each other during intimacy to be like the top things. And it's not the playful fun. It's more like, just, okay, it's a middle marriage, you're bored, start choking each other. And it's like, I'm like, we can do better than that. We can do better than that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. It's a lot of stuff that's floating out, and I think a lot of that stuff is out of pain.
Yeah.
Even the concept of marriage, there's a lot of these guys on YouTube that are just this hardcore masculine stance that they're taking, where they look at women as just completely objects, and a lot of that's getting a lot of play these days because of the pain and people not having the tools to navigate. I tell you what's interesting. I was listening to your book today, and you talked about the harmonic triads and how we all deal with things differently. Would you speak to the harmonic triads? The competency was the frustration.
Well, people call it that, yes,
Yeah.
but I end up calling it the logical competency group, the 1s, 3s, and 5, the passion or the reactivity group, the 4s, 6s, and 8s, and the positivity group, the 2s, 7s, and 9s. So yeah, when we're in conflict, we tend to lean into those spaces. And sometimes we might even have a little pull with one of the other spaces. But oftentimes there's a shadow in one of them. And when you have all three, your conflict style is very balanced. And you're going to have more of a secure attachment base because you're flowing logically, you're positive enough, and positivity is very good for keeping your brain activated and not in the fight or flight. And then you're also showing passion and care. So it's like, I care, I can be logical, and I can be positive. Like when you can bring that into a conflict, your heartbeat's not going to get raised past 100 beats a minute. You're going to stay regulated. You're going to be able to lean in a little bit, compromise, and do some good work together. When one of those areas is off, like I said, for most of us, it is one or more. We have to figure out what are our shadows as a couple and as individuals so that we can come back to that.
It's like these tools, it's almost like, I don't know how we survived prior to having these tools now, you know what I mean? Because it's like very primitive, without having these different tools and everything, because, hey, you're different, I'm different, you want to stay in your corner, I want to stay in my corner. I just think it's a blessing to take on this. What can you think of any particular, I guess, an example of a situation where you realize, like, this is what I am meant to do?
Oh,
Because marriage is such a serious thing. People are in such pain and everything. What is anything come to mind when you say, you know what, I'm doing the right thing. This is my life's work.
yeah. One of the hard ones was as an intern. My first couple was a very volatile couple, two reactive types, but I don't think it was just that. I think they had mental health and poverty issues to deal with as well. And it was just, wow, is this really the right place for me? Did I help them at all? Kind of a feeling. And I still can't answer that question to this day. But thank goodness we have to try to, stay for a while and see, what's really going on here. I thought this was my call. Is it? And as I got more experience with my first couple outside of internship and even a few within, but especially this one particular couple, the first one in my actual job as a first independent contractor, as a private practitioner, I realized, oh, this is for me because they had lost a child. And I do talk about a couple who lost a child in my book, but this couple had actually lost a daughter. And they had just really needed the support. And they had such, you could just tell one was 2-ish and one was a withdrawing type, maybe a 2-5 or a 2-6. I'm sorry, not 2-6, 2-9. And they were just so precious and didn't have the communication tools. So just seeing them heal together, cry together, we held sacredness together, dim the lights, just allowed them to process their most painful feelings about their losses. It was beautiful. And then we got to start working on other things outside of just the grief, even though that would be part of their story. And so, yeah, and they gave me like a Christmas ornament at the end of that year that I still put on my tree every year. You don't accept many gifts as a therapist or coach, but it was just a goodbye parting ornament. And it was very sweet. And I was like, wow, thank you for helping me to solidify that this was my field. Just seeing them heal was very powerful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. As we bring to a close, first of all, I really appreciate you are releasing the book this week, so I can imagine how your schedule is. So I appreciate you making time. I want to ask you, what advice would you give young couples starting out in their 20s, beginning life together, with your experience and the things that you've learned over the years, coming to you, and they're just coming for premarital counseling? What would one of the main points you would make, or some of the main points you would make to them as they start their life together?
Oh, that's a great question. And thank you for having me on this crazy week. Like I said, I may be a bit more scattered this week, but I'm so passionate about this. So I had to jump on this interview. I'm like, yes. So, like I said, especially I'm like a 5 interview. Yes. I will make this work. Um, so anyway, thanks for your grace. But also, I would say keep in mind the baseline if you're a new couple of always maintaining, trying for 6 hours a week minimally together, just for quality time outside of these coupon conversations of like, what time do you get off work in these early days? Are you going to go to my parents or yours for Thanksgiving? But to just say, yeah, those are hard and sometimes stressful. So let's always have a nice date night once or twice a week, a couple of mornings together. I would, add that if you are people of faith, I just saw a new statistic, and I'm going to maybe talking about this on my pod soon, but apparently there's a huge correlation between praying together and intimately in marriage, and longevity. So that would be one I wish I would have known early on. We did some of that, but just to hear that, like some of my friends who pray nightly, a 1-5 couple, they tell me, we don't even spend much time together, but our prayers every night just keep us bonded because we share our hearts. So I'd say share your hearts, however you do that. Take a date night, at least once or twice a week. And then, like you said so well, don't forget about the space for healthy conflict with that logic, with the positivity, and with the care. That's a great place to start. If you have more capacity after that, then listen to my podcast or get this book because I have some great tips for you.
Once again, your podcast is excellent. I took in a few episodes, and also I'm listening to my book, and my children, I'm taking them to school and they're listening to the book with me. So how can we learn more about you, your work, and also how they can access your podcast?
Oh, thank you so much. And I want to say with the audiobook, I love the reader. She did one of my friend's books, Orphan Believers by Sarah Billups. And I was like, yes, I got Sabrina too. So I was like, she's reading it better than I would have read it. A, for sure. B, you can go to enneagramandmarriage.com or Enneagram in Marriage, which is the book's title.com. And you can also find me at Instagram. I'm there almost every day of the week. I really enjoy being part of the community so that I can see what's the actual need for couples. And that's a great way for me to do that is people DM me and I get to them as quickly as I can. I really enjoy talking with people. So I never feel afraid to reach out, but listen to that podcast also, which is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, because I have over 300 episodes for people who are just wanting to dive deeper with me.
Thank you so much. Give Wes, Jack. I feel like I know your family from the book. Your daughter, I can't think of your daughter's names right now.
Anna and Melody.
Yeah. Give everybody my love. And I know you're busy, but we have to do this again soon.
Yes, we do.
So thank you so much. Y'all check out her book. Like I said, there are a lot of Enneagram books coming out like every week, and I've taken in a lot. Again, her book is excellent. I'm not saying that because she's on here. Zero fluff, real tools. And it's good when it starts. I'm listening to it for the interview, but I'm like, oh, whoa, and it's hit me in the heart. So thank you.
Glad. Thank you for having me, Ahmad. You're awesome. I love your show too. And I'm glad that we make these connections from times like this. This is awesome.
Absolutely. This is Total Confidence Podcast. I'm Ahmad Wazir. We thank our guest, Christa Hardin. Check her book out and check out her podcast. And y'all stay tuned.